It's no secret that the queer community is becoming more accepted into the film and screen industry, as more and more queer stories are being illustrated and even awarded Academy Awards.
Even in my dreams, this could not be true. But to hell with dreams. I'm done with it, because this is true. Oh my goodness.
Though this does make the film and screen industry more inclusive than before, how diverse really are these stories? When it comes to LGBTQ+ films, most stories still focus on white gay men, while everyone else seems to get left behind. For starters, though we've come a long way with LGBTQ+ representation, so many of the queer community seems to be excluded in this. There's still a lack of transgender, bisexual, ace, and even more parts of the queer community not being represented in film. Every year, GLAAD, the world's largest LGBTQ and media advocacy organization, does a study focusing on LGBTQ representation that is put out by major studios such as Lionsgate, Warner Brothers, Paramount, and more. The latest 2022 study over the 2021 statistics says that out of the 77 films released by the major studios, 16 of them, or 20.8%, included LGBTQ representation, whether this means they were the main characters or in the movie for a second. Out of the 16, 11 or 69% of them included gay men, while only 4 or 25% included lesbians, which was a huge decrease as in 2020, lesbians were in 50% of the LGBTQ inclusive films. Besides that, 2 out of the 16 or 13% of the films included bisexuals, and transgenders were only represented in 1. On and on again, bisexuals and transgenders seem to be underrepresented. In fact, this is the first time in 5 years that GLAAD was able to report on a transgender character, as before, no big studios were providing for this. With there being little to no representation for bisexuals and transgenders, there seems to be barely any room for the rest of the queer community, as there are so many parts still not being illustrated, such as the ace spectrum. Though these numbers seem to be improving, there's still a huge gap between the representation. When it comes down to it, gay men are just one part of the LGBTQ+ community, as there are so many other representations that others aren't illustrating. Besides there not being enough representation for the rest of the queer community, a big part that isn't being highlighted is intersectionality. If you don't know, intersectionality focuses on the systems of inequality in social categories such as race, class, gender, disabilities, and yes, sexuality that overlap with each other to end up creating different modes of discrimination and privilege. When you see a gay white man, there isn't any intersectionality, as the only social category he may be unequal in is sexuality. However, it's not the same for a gay man who is also a person of color. Not only is he facing discrimination for his sexuality, but it's also because of his race. Though the only difference that is seen is the color of their skin and they both share a struggle with the inequality of their sexuality, the two experiences are vastly different. This is why it's so important to help highlight this in LGBTQ+ films. Though we do get a glimpse of this in movies like Happy Together and Moonlight, there is still a huge gap in representation, as in 2021, 61% of LGBTQ+ characters were white, while 18% were black, 7% were Latinx, 7% were Asian or Pacific Islanders, 4% were Middle Eastern, and the last 4% were multiracial characters. The queer experience as a person of color is different, and queer people of color should be able to look at the screen and see the representation of their struggles as well.
He's constantly clacking women. We're lesbians, remember, Cheryl? We're into female-to-female attraction.
Another big part of intersectionality is gender, and it's obvious that men tend to be the majority in representation. In the same study, it showed that 19 men were the LGBTQ representation, 1 a trans man, while there were only 9 women. Women tend to be underrepresented as well when it comes to the LGBTQ representation. Additionally, GLAAD has yet to report any non-binaries, once again leaving out another big part of the LGBTQ community. And last but not least, LGBTQ characters with disabilities. When it comes down to it, the disabled are the least represented within film in general. Therefore, it's hard to even find representation of people with disabilities who are also queer. This is one of the hardest representations to find, as GLAAD reports that the major studios have 0 LGBTQ characters with a disability. Though these statistics are only based on big movie studios and there are several other studios creating queer stories, these findings still represent the majority of movies out there. Overall, when you look at it, queer cinema isn't as diverse as it seems. And though some might think we've come a long way, we could be doing so much better. In fact, it's known we could do so much better once you compare it to TV representation. Though there's controversy with certain streaming services and their relationship with the queer community, TV still seems to beat film in the wide variety of LGBTQ+ representation. GLAAD does a separate report for TV analyzing broadcasting, streaming services, and primetime scripted cable. For the 2021 report, there were 637 LGBTQ characters. When you compare the two reports over the same year, you can see a drastic change in the representation. From the get-go, you can already see women are more represented in TV, and you can actually see that non-binaries are in TV as well. Additionally, 50% of LGBTQ characters are people of color as well. And when you look at it, lesbians are actually more represented than gay men. In fact, there's an increase everywhere with bisexuals and transgenders. There's even asexual representation. Not only that, but there's also queer characters with disabilities within TV as well. TV excels, especially in the last 5 years, by bringing diverse queer representation. One of the best examples is Heartstopper, as though Charlie is a gay man, Kit is bisexual, and Alice Oseman does a great job diving deeper into his coming out story and making it clear that there's a difference between gay and bisexual. Additionally, there are lesbians within the show, and though they aren't the center, Oseman gives them more of a plotline than in the comics, fully giving more representation to lesbians. She also has Elle as a trans woman, giving her more time to shine within the show. There's hope to see focus on age representation as well in the upcoming seasons. Oseman does a great job capturing so many different parts of the LGBTQ+ community, stressing how there's more to it than gay men. Another great representation is Heartbreak High. In this show, we see so many different characters and different sexualities, but one of the greatest highlights is Quinny, who is autistic and a lesbian. There has been an increase in TV for people with disabilities, and Quinny is even in Glass Report when discussing the representation of LGBTQ characters with disabilities. In the show, we see some of her struggles, as with her autism, some people might see her as too much.
Yeah. But you might too much.
Therefore, there obviously can be some changes in film, as TV does a great job of showing this representation. Though it's great to have any LGBTQ representation, white gay men are such a small part of the community, and there needs to be more of a highlight on the rest of the queer community and on the intersectionality the LGBTQ community has. There has been so much fighting and struggles to fight for queer representation in film. Why stop here? Why not create a more diverse and inclusive industry?